When a young man ages out of the system with nothing but a faded photograph, he returns to the one place he was told to forget. But the abandoned farmhouse held a secret, and what he discovered there would force him to fight for a past he never truly knew. If you've ever felt lost, like you were starting over from zero with the whole world against you, then this story, because we're about to go on a journey together, and I want you to be a part of it. The bus ticket was a one-way fare to a town I hadn't seen in 8 years. It felt less like a destination and more like an edge, a place you fall off the map. My entire life was crammed into a single black backpack that had been issued to me by the state, the same way they issued toothbrushes and meal vouchers. Inside was one change of clothes, a sealed manila envelope with my birth certificate and social security card, and $74 in cash. It was my 18th birthday, and that was my inheritance from the system that had raised me. Freedom, they called it. It felt more like being pushed out of a moving car. The caseworker, a woman named Janice, with tired eyes and a perpetually strained smile, had shaken my hand with the limp finality of a doctor giving bad news. "You're an adult now, Leo. The world is yours." She handed me a pamphlet for a homeless shelter in the city, its creases worn soft like an old apology. I'd left it on the table. I wasn't going to trade one institution for another. The bus groaned through the gray, wet afternoon, the city dissolving behind us into a smear of concrete and regret. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, watching the landscape slowly bleed from urban decay to suburban neatness, and then finally to the wild, untamed green of the countryside. Each mile marker was a tick of a clock counting down to what? I didn't have a plan. I just had a memory, fragmented and hazy, of a place with a sagging porch and a sky so full of stars it felt like you could drown in them. Hemlock Creek, my grandfather's farm. The last place I had ever felt anything resembling home, before the 2 black cars came down the gravel drive and neatly, professionally, erased him from my life. They said he was unfit, old, confused, unable to care for a 10-year-old boy. I remembered the confusion on his face, the way his big, calloused hand trembled as he tried to hold onto my arm. I remembered the shame that burned in my stomach, the feeling that I was the cause of it all, that my existence had broken him. For 8 years, in 3 different group homes, that shame had been my constant companion. It was a quiet roommate that never paid rent, but took up all the space. The bus hissed to a stop at a crossroads with a single blinking yellow light. A gas station, a diner with a buzzing neon sign, and a post office. That was it. That was the thriving metropolis of Hemlock Creek. I shouldered my pack and stepped out into the damp air. It smelled of wet earth and pine, a scent so deeply buried in my memory it felt like a ghost on my tongue. The bus pulled away, its red tail lights vanishing into the mist, and the silence that descended was absolute. It was a living thing, that quiet. It pressed in on me from all sides. For a moment, I was paralyzed. The reality of my situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was 18 years old, utterly alone, with no skills, no money, and nowhere to go. The smart thing to do would be to turn around, hitch a ride back to the city, and find that shelter. The smart thing would be to accept the hand I'd been dealt. But I was tired of being smart. I was tired of doing what I was told. I turned my back on the crossroads and started walking down the old county road, the one that led out of town, the one I only remembered from the back seat of a social worker's sedan as I cried and watched my whole world disappear in the rearview mirror. The walk was longer than I remembered. 2 miles, then 3. The sun was setting, painting the bruised purple clouds in strokes of fiery orange. My shoes, thin-soled and worn, were soaked through from the damp asphalt. A pickup truck rattled past, slowed, and then stopped a few yards ahead. An old man with a face like a worn leather map leaned out the window. "You look lost, son," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Need a lift?" I hesitated. In the city, you never got into a stranger's car. It was rule number 1. But this wasn't the city. The rules felt different here. The air felt different. I nodded. "I'm heading out toward the old Miller place," I said, the name feeling foreign and familiar at the same time. He grunted. "Ain't nobody been out to the Miller place in years. Not since they took old Gus away." He didn't have to say anything else. He knew. In a town this small, everyone knew everything. I climbed in, the cab smelling of oil and coffee. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. "You his grandkid, ain't you?" the man finally asked, not looking at me. "Leo." I just nodded, my throat tight. "Heard you were in the system," he said, and it wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "Tough break. Your granddad was a good man, stubborn as a mule stuck in mud, but a good man." He pulled over where a barely there gravel path disappeared into a thicket of overgrown trees. "This is it. Driveway's too washed out to take the truck up. Good luck, son." I thanked him and got out. He watched me for a moment, his expression unreadable, then put the truck in gear and drove off, leaving me once again in the overwhelming silence of the woods. The driveway was more of a suggestion than a road. Weeds grew thick and high, and young saplings had pushed their way through the gravel. It was a 200-yard walk, and with every step, the feeling of dread and hope churned in my stomach. I was trespassing on my own life. Then, through a break in the trees, I saw it. The farmhouse. It was worse than I remembered. The paint was almost completely gone, leaving the wood siding a ghostly, weathered gray. The porch roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and several windows were boarded up, while others were just dark, gaping holes. It looked haunted. It looked like the physical manifestation of my own neglect. My heart sank. What was I thinking? That I could just show up and, what, live here? In a ruin? A fresh wave of despair washed over me. I was an idiot. A sentimental idiot chasing a ghost. I sat down on a moss-covered rock, the damp seeping into my jeans, and I put my head in my hands. The full weight of my 18th birthday, my supposed freedom, came crashing down. I was homeless. I was truly, irrevocably homeless. After a while, the cold started to seep into my bones. The sky was nearly dark, and a thin, miserable drizzle had begun to fall. I couldn't stay out here. I looked at the house again. It was a wreck, but it was a wreck with a roof. It was shelter. With a sigh that felt like it came from the very bottom of my soul, I got up and walked toward the porch. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one carefully before putting my full weight on it. The front door was locked tight, swollen in its frame. I walked the perimeter, peering into the dark windows. Around back, a window into what looked like the kitchen had been broken, the glass shattered long ago. A piece of plywood had been nailed over it, but the wood was rotten. I pulled at it, and a large chunk came away in my hand, crumbling into damp mulch. The opening was just big enough. I tossed my backpack in first, hearing it land with a soft thud, then hoisted myself up and through, wincing as a shard of glass scraped my arm. I landed on the dusty linoleum floor in a crouch, my heart pounding. I was in. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of dust and decay, and the faint sweet scent of rotting wood. I stood still for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. Moonlight filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating a scene of quiet devastation. Cobwebs hung in thick gray veils. A layer of dust coated every surface. The place had been abandoned, but it hadn't been emptied. The furniture was still here, shrouded in shadows like sleeping giants. I found my backpack and felt for the small flashlight on the side pocket. The beam cut a weak yellow circle through the oppressive darkness. I was in the kitchen. A cast-iron stove stood cold in the corner. Cupboard doors hung open on rusted hinges. And in the center of the room, a heavy, solid wood table. I ran my hand over its surface, my fingers coming away black with grime. I moved through the rest of the downstairs. A living room, with a sofa and armchair covered in what might have once been white sheets, now gray and stained. A fireplace, the hearth filled with old dry leaves that had blown down the chimney. Everything was a time capsule of the day my life ended and began again. Upstairs, there were two small bedrooms. In one, a simple iron bed frame. In the other, a child's room. My room. A small wooden chest sat at the foot of the bed. I knelt and lifted the lid. It was empty. Of course it was. They would have packed up my things, the few toys and books I owned, and brought them with me. I didn't remember. I didn't remember anything from that day except the feeling of being torn away. I went back downstairs, the weight of the empty house pressing down on me. I wasn't going to sleep in that little room, not tonight. The memories were too close, too sharp. I decided on the living room sofa. I took off the dusty sheet, shaking it out on the porch and sending up a choking cloud. I laid it back down, dropped my backpack as a pillow, and lay down, fully clothed, pulling my jacket tight around me. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind that rattled the loose window frames, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was an intruder, a squatter. But as the hours wore on, a strange sense of peace began to settle over me. The house was groaning, yes, but it felt like the groans of an old man settling into a comfortable chair, not the shriek of a ghost. The sounds were familiar. Deep in the recesses of my brain, I knew these sounds. This was the house's language. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't sleeping in a room with 5 other boys, listening to the sounds of their troubled sleep. I was alone. But for the first time, being alone didn't feel like being lonely. It felt like coming home. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold, but rested. The sun was streaming through the dirty windows, illuminating the thick dust motes dancing in the air. The house looked less menacing in the daylight, more sad. It needed care. It needed life. My first priority was survival. I had $74. That wouldn't last long. I needed water, food. I found an old bucket in the mudroom and took it out to the hand pump. I remembered standing over the well in the backyard. My heart sank when I saw it. A rust-eaten relic, its handle seized tight. I put all my weight on it, grunting with the effort. Nothing. Then, a groan, a squeal of protesting metal, and it moved. Just an inch. I kept at it, back and forth, the rhythmic squeaking the only sound in the morning air. Finally, a gush of brown, sludgy water coughed from the spout. I kept pumping, and slowly, miraculously, the water began to run clear. I drank deeply, the water cold and tasting of minerals and earth. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted. I filled the bucket and took it inside. I needed to clean. Not just for hygiene, but for my own sanity. I needed to impose some order on this chaos, to make a small corner of this place mine. I decided to start with the kitchen. It was the heart of a house, my grandfather used to say. I found a few old rags under the sink and started with the table. It was covered in a thick layer of filth, a combination of dust, dirt, and what looked like animal droppings. I scrubbed, the work methodical and mindless. I scrubbed until my arms ached. As the layers of grime came away, the beauty of the wood beneath began to show. It was a deep, rich oak, scarred and stained with decades of use. It was a map of a life. Burns from hot pans, knife cuts from chopping vegetables, a dark ring where a coffee cup had been left 1,000 times. I was working on a particularly stubborn patch of grime in the center of the table when my rag caught on something. I thought it was a splinter and pulled back, but it was a deep, deliberate groove. I leaned closer, my curiosity piqued. I scrubbed harder at that spot, using my fingernail to dig into the groove. It wasn't just one groove, it was a whole network of them. My breath caught in my throat. I stood back and looked at the table from a different angle, letting the light from the window catch the surface just right. It wasn't just a collection of random scratches. It was a drawing, a map. It was crude, etched into the wood with a knife by an unsteady hand, but it was unmistakable. I could see the rough outline of the property. There was the creek, a wavy line running along the bottom edge. There was the main house, a small square. The barn, a larger rectangle. And a circle indicating the massive old oak tree on the hill. But there was more. There were other marks, symbols I didn't recognize. An X near the stone wall that separated the property from the woods. A series of numbers next to the fireplace hearth, drawn inside the square of the house. A star symbol out in the middle of the field, halfway between the house and the barn. What was this? A child's game? My grandfather doodling? It felt like more than that. The marks were too deliberate, too placed. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The house, which had felt sad and neglected, suddenly felt charged with a different energy. It felt like it was holding its breath. It felt like it had a secret. My eyes were drawn to the marks by the fireplace. A series of 3 numbers, 7, 4, 11. I walked over to the hearth, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. The fireplace was built of large, flat field stones, mortared together. I started counting the stones from the left on the 7th row from the floor. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4th stone. It looked just like all the others, gray and solid. I pushed on it. Nothing. I ran my fingers along the mortar line. It felt a little different, softer, more crumbly than the surrounding mortar. I dug at it with my fingernails, and a small chunk came loose. My excitement grew. I found a sturdy-looking stick on the porch and used it as a lever, wedging it into the crack I'd made. I put my weight on it. The stick snapped. I cursed under my breath. I needed something stronger. I remembered seeing a rusty old tire iron in the back of the pickup truck that had dropped me off. There had to be something similar here. I searched the dilapidated shed out back, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. After 10 minutes of rummaging through rusted tools and rotted canvas, I found it. A heavy iron crowbar. It felt solid and purposeful in my hands. Back at the fireplace, I jammed the tip of the crowbar into the crack and leaned on it with all my strength. There was a horrible grating sound, and then, with a soft puff of dust, the stone shifted. It moved inward, just an inch. My hands were trembling as I worked my fingers around the edge and pulled. The stone came loose, heavy and solid, revealing a dark, square cavity behind it. I shone my flashlight into the hole, and there, sitting on a bed of what looked like old, yellowed newspaper, was a metal box. It was an old ammunition box, painted army green, with a sturdy latch on the front. It wasn't locked. With fumbling fingers, I lifted the latch and opened the lid. The contents made the air leave my lungs in a rush. Inside, there were two things. The first was a thick stack of $100 bills, bound with a simple rubber band. I'd never seen so much money in one place in my entire life. It had to be thousands of dollars. My mind reeled. Was my grandfather a criminal? Was this stolen? But it was the second item that truly stole my breath. It was a thick, yellowed envelope, sealed with wax. On the front, in my grandfather's familiar, spidery handwriting, was a single word: Leo. My name. I lifted the envelope out of the box. It was heavy, thick with pages. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. This was impossible. This was a dream. I sat down hard on the dusty floor, the cold of the stones seeping through my jeans, and stared at the envelope. This was a message from the dead. A letter from a man I had spent 8 years trying to forget. A man I had secretly blamed for the emptiness in my life. I didn't know if I had the courage to open it. What if it was a confession? What if it was an apology? What if it was just the ramblings of a senile old man? For a full 10 minutes, I just sat there, the weight of the past and the future pressing down on me in that dusty, silent room. The money in the box was a way out. I could take it, walk away from this ruin, and start a new life somewhere else. No one would ever know. I could be anyone I wanted to be. But my eyes kept coming back to the envelope, to my name. He had written this for me. He had hidden it for me. Whatever was inside, I had to know. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I broke the wax seal and pulled out the folded pages. The letter began, "My Leo, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, it means I am gone, and for that I am sorry. I hope it was peaceful. Second, and more importantly, it means you have come home. And for that, my boy, my heart is full." The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I wiped them away angrily and kept reading. His voice was so clear in the words. I could almost hear him speaking. His low, rumbling voice filling the silent house. "I know you have questions," he wrote. "I know you must have been angry with me. You have every right to be. They told you I was sick, that I couldn't care for you. They were right in a way, but not the way they thought. I wasn't sick in the head, Leo. I was sick of being pushed around. There are wolves in this world, son. They come dressed in nice suits, with friendly smiles and legal papers. A few years before they took you, a company came sniffing around, a development firm called Ridgeview. They wanted this land. They wanted to tear down our home and build their fancy houses for city folks. I told them no, but they don't take no for an answer. They started looking for ways to force me out. They saw an old man living alone with his grandson on 100 acres of prime real estate, and they saw an opportunity. They started making calls to the county, to social services. They started building a case that I was unfit, that the property was neglected, that you weren't in a safe environment. The pages trembled in my hand. It had never occurred to me that there was a reason, a plan behind what had happened. I had always seen it as a simple, tragic failure. My grandfather's failure. My failure. I knew I couldn't fight them head on, the letter continued. They had money and lawyers. I had a bad back and a rusty tractor. So I decided to fight them a different way. I had to make them believe they were right. I had to make them believe I was just a poor, confused old man with nothing to his name. I stopped fixing the porch. I let the paint peel. I sold off the good livestock and kept only a few old hens. I started hiding my money, the money I'd been saving for you your whole life, in places where they would never think to look. The table, Leo. The map on the table is your key. I carved it the week before they came for you. I knew my time was running out. But the hardest part, the part that broke my own heart every single day, was you. They were going to use you as the weapon to take everything from me. They would say I couldn't provide for you, and the court would agree, and they would appoint a guardian for my estate, a guardian who would be all too happy to sell this land to the highest bidder. I couldn't let that happen. This land, this house, it's not just dirt and wood, Leo. It's our story. It's your great-grandmother's garden. It's the tree I fell out of when I was your age. It's the porch where your mother took her first steps. It is everything. And so I had to make the most terrible choice a man can make. I had to let them take you, to protect your future. I had to let you go, so that one day you would have something to come back to. They thought they were taking you away from a broken old man, but I was sending you away from the fight, keeping you safe until you were old enough to fight it yourself. Forgive me, Leo. Forgive me for letting you believe I had abandoned you. It was the only way I could think of to save your inheritance. I wasn't reading anymore. The words were just a black, swimming blur. A great, ragged sob tore its way out of my chest, a sound of such pain and grief that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the old house. I cried for the 10-year-old boy ripped away from the only home he'd ever known. I cried for the lonely teenager who had spent 8 years believing he was unwanted, a burden. And most of all, I cried for the old man who had sacrificed everything, who had allowed himself to be seen as a failure in the eyes of the world, and in the eyes of the person he loved most, all to protect a legacy. The shame I had carried for so long was replaced by a wave of furious, righteous anger. Anger at the system, at the men in suits, at the faceless company that had torn our lives apart for profit. I was no longer an intruder in this house. I was its defender. The letter wasn't finished. I picked it up again, my hands steady now, my purpose clear. The money in the box is for the back taxes. They will have piled up. There's a woman in town, a lawyer named Aris Thorne. Her father was my best friend. She's smart and she's honest. Go to her. Show her this letter. She will help you. The rest of the map will lead you to the rest of the money I saved. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to fix the roof, to get the power turned back on, to live. Now, you have a choice, son. It's a choice I am leaving entirely to you, and I will not blame you whichever way you go. You can take all the money and leave, disappear, start a new life somewhere far away from this mess. Build something for yourself and never look back. Or you can stay. You can fight. You can claim what is yours and tell those wolves that this land is not for sale. It will be hard. They won't give up easy. But this house is strong, Leo. It has good bones, and so do you. You have my blood in you. You have the blood of this land in you. Whatever you choose, know that I loved you more than anything. Know that every single day you were gone, I was thinking of you. Be a good man, Leo. That's all I ever wanted. Your loving grandfather, Gus. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The choice he had laid out before me wasn't really a choice at all. How could I run? How could I take the money and leave this place to be bulldozed into oblivion? It would be spitting on his grave. It would be invalidating the single greatest sacrifice I had ever known. He hadn't just left me a house and some money. He had left me a purpose. He had left me a war to win. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. I was just a kid. I had no idea how to fight a corporation. But looking at my grandfather's words, feeling the weight of his love and his trust across the years, I knew I wouldn't be fighting alone. I had him with me. I had this house with me. The anger had burned away the grief, leaving behind a hard, clear resolve. I stood up and looked around the dusty room. It wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a fortress, and I was its guardian. My first step was clear. I had to go and see Eris Thorne. Listen, I need to pause here for a second. Have you ever been given a choice that felt too big for you? A responsibility that scared you to death, but also made you feel more alive than you've ever been? It's a moment where you can either shrink from the challenge or grow into the person you were meant to be. If you've ever felt that weight, that terrifying, clarifying moment of decision, let me by sharing these moments, by recognizing that struggle is the thing that shapes us. It helps to know you're not alone in facing those big questions. Okay, let's get back to it. I had a lawyer to find. I walked back into town the next day feeling like a different person. The $74 in my pocket felt insignificant next to the thousands tucked into my backpack and the heavy weight of my grandfather's letter pressed against my chest. The town of Hemlock Creek, which had seemed so small and sleepy the day before, now looked like a potential battleground. I found the law office of Eris Thorne on a side street, sandwiched between a bakery and a hardware store. It was a modest storefront with gold lettering peeling on the glass. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. A bell chimed softly. The woman behind the desk looked up. She was probably in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a no-nonsense gray blazer and an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped and professional. "I'm here to see Ms. Thorne," I said, my voice sounding younger and less confident than I wanted. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but my name is Leo Miller. My grandfather was Gus Miller." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a spark of recognition, or maybe curiosity. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared through a door behind her desk. A few moments later she returned. "She'll see you." Her office was cramped and cluttered, filled with stacks of books and files that threatened to avalanche onto the floor. The air smelled of old paper and strong coffee. She sat behind a large wooden desk, gesturing for me to take the chair opposite her. "Leo Miller," she said, her voice a low, measured alto. "I haven't heard that name in a long time. I remember you as a little boy, chasing frogs down by the creek. What can I do for you?" I didn't know where to start. I felt like a child confessing a crime. "I've been staying at my grandfather's house," I began. Her eyebrows shot up. "You're aware that property is in arrears on its taxes, that it's scheduled for a lien sale in less than 3 months. I nodded. "I know. I found something. He left me something." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, sliding it across the desk to her. She picked it up, her long fingers turning it over, examining the seal I had broken. She looked at me, a question in her eyes, and I nodded. She carefully unfolded the pages and began to read. I watched her face, trying to decipher her reaction. For the first few pages, her expression remained impassive, the careful mask of a lawyer. But as she read on, I saw it begin to crack. Her lips tightened. A muscle in her jaw twitched. When she got to the part about her father, she paused, and looked out the window for a long moment. When she finally finished, she folded the pages with meticulous care and placed them back on the desk. She looked at me, and for the first time, the professional hardness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something softer, something like sorrow, and something like respect. "My God," she whispered, "that stubborn, crazy, brilliant old man. He actually did it." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "Ridgeview Development," she said, the name tasting like poison. "They've been circling this valley for a decade, buying up family farms, pressuring people to sell. Your grandfather was one of the last holdouts on that side of the river. When he lost you, we all thought he'd just given up, that his heart was broken. We had no idea he was fighting. We had no idea he was playing the long game." She looked at me, her eyes sharp again, all business. "The back taxes amount to just over $16,000. The lien sale is in 81 days. Ridgeview's lawyers are the ones who initiated the proceedings. They're expecting to pick up the 100 acres for a fraction of its worth. This letter," she tapped the envelope, "changes things. It establishes intent. It establishes a de facto trust. But it's not a legal document. They will fight it." "I have the money for the taxes," I said quietly. I unzipped my backpack and laid the stack of cash on her desk. She stared at it, then let out a low whistle. "Gus always was full of surprises," she said, a small, wry smile touching her lips. "Okay, Leo Miller, here's what we're going to do. First, we pay the taxes. That stops the sale immediately. It takes their easiest weapon away from them. Second, we file to have you recognized as the sole heir to the estate. Your grandfather didn't leave a formal will, which is what Ridgeview was counting on. They assumed the property would become ward of the state, and they could grease the right palms to acquire it. This letter is our will. It's not perfect, but it's powerful." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "This will not be easy. They will come at you. They'll offer you money, a lot of money, more money than you've ever dreamed of. They'll try to intimidate you. They'll try to prove you're just as unfit as they claimed your grandfather was. Are you ready for that?" I thought of the cold bus ride, of the despair I'd felt sitting on that mossy rock, of the overwhelming love I'd felt reading my grandfather's words. "Yes," I said, and the word felt solid, real. "I'm ready." The next few months were a blur of work and waiting. Aris was true to her word. She paid the back taxes, the clerk at the county office looking stunned as she counted out the cash. She filed the paperwork, and as she predicted, Ridgeview's lawyers immediately filed a challenge. The battle had begun. But it was a slow, grinding battle, fought with paper and legal jargon, and it left me with too much time to think. So I worked. I used the map on the table as my guide. The X by the stone wall led me to a loose section of the wall. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was another bundle of cash and a small, leather-bound journal. It was my grandfather's. The entries were short, terse, notes about the weather, the crops, and then, later, about Ridgeview. "The wolves came today, smiled with too many teeth." Another entry. "They talk about progress. It looks a lot like greed." And the last one, dated the day before they took me. "I am sending the boy away. This is the only path I see. God help me." The star in the middle of the field was the hardest to find. I had to dig. I spent 2 days digging holes, my back screaming in protest, before my shovel finally hit something hard. It was another ammo can, this one heavier. Inside was more money, but also a collection of old black and white photographs of my grandmother, my mother as a little girl, and me as a baby. He had saved our memories, buried them in the earth to keep them safe. With the money, I started to bring the house back to life. I bought lumber and tools from the hardware store in town. The man who ran it was the son of the man who had given me a ride. He looked at me with a new respect. "Heard you're fixing up Gus's place," he said, loading planks of wood into the back of his truck to deliver. "Good on you." The whole town seemed to be watching me, a quiet, cautious audience. I started by fixing the broken windows, replacing the rotten boards on the porch. The work was hard, punishing. I made a lot of mistakes, but every nail I hammered, every board I sawed, felt like an act of defiance. I was healing the house, and in a way, I was healing myself. I cleared the overgrown garden, finding the faint outlines of my great-grandmother's flower beds. I got the old tractor in the barn running again, its engine coughing to life like a resurrected giant. I was covered in dirt and sweat from sunup to sundown, and I had never felt more alive. One evening, as I was sitting on the newly repaired porch steps, watching the sunset, a sleek black sedan I didn't recognize came up the driveway. A man in an expensive suit got out. He had a practiced, easy smile and a briefcase. He was one of the wolves. "Leo Miller," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "My name is John Carmichael. I'm a representative for Ridgeview Development. I have to say, you've done a lot with the place." "It's not for sale," I said, my voice flat. His smile didn't waver. "Everything is for sale, son, for the right price. We're prepared to offer you $500,000, cash. You could walk away from this project and be set for life. New car, new apartment, college, whatever you want." $500,000. The number was so large it was abstract. It was a fantasy number. The 10-year-old me, the 17-year-old me, would have wept with joy at the thought of it. But the 18-year-old me, sitting on his grandfather's porch, just felt a cold, hard anger. He was trying to buy my grandfather's sacrifice. He was trying to buy our story. "The answer is no," I said. "I think you should leave." For the first time, his smile faltered. Annoyance flickered in his eyes. "Don't be a fool, kid. That's a life-changing offer. This is a falling-down shack on a pile of dirt. Don't let some misplaced sentimentality ruin your future." "This pile of dirt is my future," I said, standing up. "Now get off my property." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. I knew it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The phone call came a week later. It was Aris. "We won," she said, and her voice was filled with a triumphant exhaustion. "They dropped the challenge. The judge ruled in our favor. The estate, the house, the land, it's all yours, Leo, free and clear." I sank down onto the kitchen chair, the one my grandfather had probably sat in 1,000 times, and I let the news wash over me. It was over. We had won. He had won. So, what is the lesson in all of this? I've had a lot of time to think about that, sitting on this porch, watching the seasons change over the valley. I think it's that inheritance isn't always about what you're given. It's about what you choose to accept. My grandfather didn't just leave me land and money. He left me a choice. He left me a story and asked me to write the ending. And in writing that ending, I found myself. I learned that home isn't just a place you live. It's a place you fight for. It's a place you bleed for. It's the story you tell yourself about who you are. The scars from my time in the system are still there. They don't just vanish. There are nights I still wake up feeling that old, familiar hollowness, the fear of being alone. But then I hear the house creak, I smell the pine trees on the night air, and I remember that I am not alone. I am part of a story that is much bigger than I am. I am a steward of a legacy of love and stubborn, defiant resilience. The farmhouse still needs a lot of work. The fields need to be tilled. The barn needs a new roof. It's a lifetime of work. But it's my work. It's my life. I am no longer the lost boy on the bus. I am the man of the house. And my grandfather, I think, would be proud. Maybe you have a story like that. A place that defines you. A person whose memory you carry. A quiet battle you're fighting that no one else can see. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own foundations, your own inheritance of stories and struggles, you don't have to share the details, just the truth of it. Let's fill this space with a testament to our own resilience, a recognition of the legacies we all carry. This community is built on the understanding that the hardest parts of our stories are often what make us the strongest. If you want to be a part of a community that believes in second chances, in fighting for what matters, and in the power of finishing the story someone else started for you, my journey here on this farm is just beginning, and I have a feeling yours is too. Let's walk this